Good evening. Welcome to the International Grapevine. This is your host, Wallinford Lee. Tonight in the Grapevine, we want to talk about the eminent and important role of the Black woman voting rights in the 2020 election that's coming up. It's important to know right now America is going through a tremendous amount of crisis in terms of all the things that have taken place. Recently, we had a Black man actually murdered right in Minnesota. And there has been a lot of marches, a whole lot of marches due to this problem that happened. However, we're here to move forward to talk about the election, and it gives us a great deal of pleasure and, of course, satisfaction to have our special guest, someone that we have worked with in the past and many occasions. I'm talking about Mary Phillips, who happened to be a professor of English and African Studies in Lehman College. It gives us a great deal of course, a pleasure and satisfaction to have her on board. Mary, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's been a while, and we wanted to get you back on this sensitive issue because what we want to talk about, the pivotal role of Black women in terms of the Black vote and what have you. In your estimation, why is it so important to vote, and why now?
It is critical for us to vote now. I mean, we are in the midst of a global and racial pandemic. You know, there's been a lot of symbolism happening, right? We have a street in Washington, D.C. that now has the beautiful words, Black Lives Matter.
Matters.
We have Confederate statues coming down, right? There's a lot of symbolism happening. But what we need is real structural change. We need folks in office that have the power to implement that change, right? And so it's critical that we have people at the voting polls, that we have people voting right now, because that is a critical way for us to actually make change on the ground, moving more so outside of just this symbolism. We need a new system. And part of the way to get that is to show up at the polls.
I guess the key component is just what you mentioned. It is the most important thing right now, not to run your mouth, but get out there and vote. If you get out and vote, you can make a big difference. And the Black vote is extremely important now more than ever. How powerful is the Black vote as we move forward in this upcoming election in November 2020?
Mm-hmm. You know, I will say that many of us, when we get out there and vote, we can actually demand change. Right? When we get the youth out there, when we get, all of us out there in droves, right? However it takes, we can actually implement change because there's enough of us to do so. Now, the real barrier is the structural racism, right? That we often encounter at the voting polls. So there's a long history of voting disenfranchisement, right? That we often have to battle when we at the polls, right? Our ballots get lost. We experience forms of discrimination, right?
Especially in Florida, but go ahead.
Exactly. We can go on and on about that. So, that's one thing that has been a problem that we have to consistently push through, right? So even as we're voting, the structure is violent, and the structure promotes racism. However,
and how can we fix that structure? What you're saying is extremely important. Make no question about it.
Yeah.
But how do we knock down a structure? How do we get through that and open that door and bust it wide open for things to go in the right manner?
We amplify the ways in which we have been victims of voting disenfranchisement, of racist oppression. We amplify that. We make sure that people know what is going on, right? We create our own structures of change. We organize, right? We consistently keep showing up, right? In droves for every election, not just the election that happens in November for the presidency, but every last election that happens on the city level, on the local level, right? On the state level, we need to show up. right?
That's great what you're talking about. The voting is not only for the presidency, but we got to think about Congress. We got to think about all the other things that make your vote carry the weight. We need changes, especially if we feel, or some of us feel, there's a lack of leadership. So when you talk about voting, is not only for the president, right?
Right, right. We need to, so one thing we have to do is we have to be educated, right? We have to learn who's on the ballot. Are they advocating for us? What are their goals? What is their vision? Does it, are we represented in that vision, right? And so we have to educate ourselves so we can go to those polls informed. We should know who's on the ballot. We should know their platform, right? And if we're represented in that platform, that's critical. And the reason why I emphasize we have to show up, because as you know, at one time, Black folks could not vote, right?
I remember, I know it.
Yeah, women could not vote, right? We had the 19th Amendment passed in 1920. It gave white women, right, the right to vote. Black women wasn't able to vote until the Voting Rights Act that was passed in 1965. Right?
It's interesting that you talk about it, and I want you to stretch it because young America is not aware, especially young Black America is not aware of those type of histories and those type of issues that we encounter way back when, especially when women were not allowed to vote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you had women who, Black women in particular, who died, right, for the right for us to vote. Right, you have the story of Fannie Lou Hamer, right, who was a sharecropper, who was an activist in the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and she was literally pushed off her land, right? She was sexually harassed, right? She was violated, right? She experienced just an onslaught of racist and sexual oppression, right, to vote, right? And so there's many stories like that. Right? I mean, you know, Black women, you know, since we're talking about Black women, put themselves on a line, put their bodies on a line for us to vote. So we have to exercise our right to vote.
And that right is power. It's interesting that you mentioned that. If we go back to 2016 and we look at the numbers, then 69% of Latino women voted for Hillary. 98% of Black women voted for Hillary. But what killed us overall is most of the Black people did not go out to vote that time. And we pay the consequences for it. So what can we do about it now? Now's the time. Now we're looking at 2020. November's coming up right on us now. Let's talk about how powerful and strong the Latino vote is and the Black women vote is. Mm-hmm. How can they make a difference? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, I mean, and it also reminds me, as I'm hearing you say that, the vote of communities of color, like with that vote, when we talk about the Latino vote, when we talk about the Black vote, right? I mean, we just had a past election where there was a lot of women of color that was voted in Congress for the first time ever. Yes. Right? Yes. I mean, this is particularly important, right? And this is the first, right? And so, you know, and we're in this moment where you see all of these nationwide protests happening on the ground, right? So there's a renewed sense of energy. You know, folks are planning a march on Washington in celebration of the anniversary of the March on Washington. All of this is tied, right? Today is the day of George Floyd's funeral, right? Yes, yes. And so there's a renewed sense of energy in our youth, in those young activists out there who are demanding change. And I believe that that would be replicated in the polls, right?
I hope you're right, because the marches have shown me something very strong. I remember the first time when Obama ran and he won. One of the things when people talk and criticize Obama, most white people, they forgot that it's white young voters got him in there along with the Black voters, but it's the young white guys that wanted a change and believe in him and believe in his structures and his ideas, and his presentation was so solid. In the marches that we have in for George, who's just as you mentioned, he was just laid arrest today in Houston at about 3 o'clock. We see that in the marches, a lot of young white guys, arms in arms with Latinos, with Blacks. It gives me an inspiration, and it tells me that maybe there are changes of good things coming down the road. What do you think?
You know, I see, I mean, right now, when you talk about those changes coming down the road, people are advocating that we defund the police, right? Because what's
Mhm.
happening is the police are killing Black and brown folks, right? We're seeing genocide, we're seeing white vigilante terror on Black bodies, right? We're seeing folks demanding their humanity. We're seeing Black folks demanding their humanity, putting stuff on the line. So I foresee many changes coming down the road. We need to address multiple issues. For example, when we talk about structural racism, it's not just about defunding the police, but it's also about addressing poverty. It's about addressing our healthcare system. When we talk about structural racism, right, that directly affects our poor health outcomes of Black communities. It's directly tied to structural racism, right? So we have to, change, our healthcare system. More people should have access, right? We need more. We need to challenge unemployment, right? So it's multiple issues that are happening, multiple structural barriers. We need to address our prison industrial complex because
Yes.
it's not serving us, right?
Yes.
And so these are some of the things that I see, right? And it comes with folks. Part of that comes with folks showing up at the polls, right? We get, a large amount of Black communities, Latino communities showing up at the polls. It can make a difference. It can make a difference.
It could and it should. It's important that you mentioned that it can and it will make a difference. And the marches is telling us so. As we continue talking about this upcoming election, where do you think minorities stand with the Republican Party? Because it goes without saying that our president, Mr. Trump, has a very large, strong base. Does he have the opportunity to capture the Black vote?
Well, let me say this. I am praying that Black and brown folks do not support Trump, right? And do not go out there and vote for Trump, because he has demonstrated on multiple occasions, that he does not work in service, right, of our communities, right? The tweets that he's been putting out are violent and are hateful, right? I'm hoping also that all of these white protesters that we see out there will also not put him back in office and not vote for Trump, right? And so, he doesn't work in service of us. So I'm hoping, as we saw with the last, it wasn't Black and brown folks who voted for Trump.
No, not at all. So in other words, you think, as you look at it in your imagination and your thought process, you think the Latino vote and the Black women vote and the Black vote in general will go Democrat?
Yes, I do. I do believe that. I mean,
what gives you that feeling?
Because, I think people have a solid understanding and an awareness, right, that when we talk about fighting for our humanity, right, Trump does not do that. I mean, we're in the midst of all of these nationwide protests, and he's talking about putting the military out there, right, to quell the protests, right?
Unbelievable.
There's a large amount of Black and brown folks in the military. So we're going to put, Black and brown folks to attack our own people. I mean, it just makes no sense. You're inciting a race war regardless, and it's problematic. And so, I truly believe, as we've seen in elections in the past, that many of us, Black and brown folks, did indeed vote democratically.
Well, we'll see where it goes. As we get back on International Grapevine, we're going to thank and continue talking to Mayor Phillips about these important things that has to do with the upcoming election. We'll be right back on International Grapevine.
There are all types of innovators. Not all of them are the inventor type. Some made their mark when they took a stand for what was right. On this bus, history was made when one woman took a seat for what was right. This is the actual bus aboard which Rosa Parks changed the world of race relations forever. In the American South in 1955, segregated busing meant whites sat in the front of the bus and African Americans in the back. And if the bus was full, and a white man entered, an African American was expected to give up his or her seat. One day in Montgomery, Alabama, an understated African American seamstress and trained civil rights activist named Rosa Parks refused to give up her bus seat to a white man.
He demanded the seat that we were occupying. The other passengers very reluctantly gave up their seats, but I refused to do so.
That's the voice of Rosa Parks herself, being played aboard the very bus she rode that day.
That day, December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks sat down and refused to give up her seat. She remained composed, being threatened by an armed bus driver who had the law behind him, and then was arrested and brought to jail and booked. That quiet, church-going woman stood up for her rights and was courageous all the way through it. That opened the doorway for Martin Luther King and his colleagues to start the Montgomery bus boycott.
This nonviolent protest inspired a 381-day boycott of the buses in Montgomery, which eventually led to the repeal of the city's law requiring segregation on buses. And Rosa Parks became an icon of the civil rights movement.
This bus is the most significant artifact collected by any museum of the modern civil rights movement in America. What it represents is a transformative moment in time.
Yes, the actual bus that Rosa Parks rode that day is here at the Henry Ford in Dearborn, Michigan.
We need that story to be told over and over and over again because it resonates for today. It has meaning for our world today, and we have to learn those lessons from the past in order to make a better future.
Without an ongoing effort to tell stories, they can be lost. And the bus itself has a story that was nearly lost.
What year did the bus come here?
The bus came here in 2001.
And before that, where was it?
The bus was right outside of Montgomery, Alabama. It was on a farm, and it was actually being used as a storage shed, a tool shed, if you will. A man named Roy Summerford bought the bus in 1971, and he bought it from the Montgomery bus lines. And he knew at the time it was the Rosa Parks bus.
But that wasn't enough. The Henry Ford wanted to be sure that this was the bus, and after an extensive authentication process, they paid $427,000 at auction.
This is an article from a scrapbook that we acquired along with the Rosa Parks bus.
Inside a scrapbook owned by a bus company employee, the critical information was found, the bus number 2857.
So there you have that original signature of 2857, that matching that period of 1955, and then also the scrapbook with 2857. That's the signature that brought it together.
A bus perfectly restored, a metamorphosis from a rusted shell to a learning ground, and a nation transformed by a woman who stood up for civil rights when she remained seated.
And we're back here in an International Grapevine talking about the upcoming election here in November and the expectation of the Black women vote, how important it is and how strong the Black women vote can be, and the Black vote in general, and of course the Latino vote. It's encompassed that all of them should get together and have an idea what they want to do and who they want in the White House. This is the opportunity, is now or never. Not to whine and complain, but make your vote count. Mary, as we continue to talk, we'll talk a little bit about the Republican Party and what have you. I understand that Biden is going to represent the Democrats. What are the chances of him making it to be the president of this nation?
I think it's a strong chance that he will make it. I mean, he has a lot of history. He has a lot of power, right? He was, he has a lot of influence, and so the way the structures are set up, I think it's very likely that he will probably be the person that is, that's the pick. The issue is who will he, make his vice president.
Well, we'll get to that. One of the things that I was concerned is that he was looking very bad in the poll until he went to North Carolina and South Carolina. It goes without saying that the Black vote brought him alive, and he came alive and turned it around. I think he was on the ropes, and he got off the ropes. But I think one of the most important thing is I haven't seen a lot of commercials from him, and I hope to see a lot more coming up now because we're getting up to November. We need to talk about possible he's going to pick for vice president. We need to talk about what is his structure and ideas. What are the changes that he have in mind? And more important, what are the expectations for Latinos and Black going forward if he becomes president? What is his plan? What is his idea? Do you have any idea?
And I think we gotta wait and see. My thing with these folks, they talk very big, right? They he was just on that popular radio show and had a conversation with one of the DJs, and
that didn't go too well.
Yeah, I mean, he was saying all of that. He was performing. He was performing and saying what he felt like he needed to say to appeal to Black folks, and it was problematic, right? He was performing in a way, to me, that was read as offensive. And so I think, a lot of these politicians talk a lot of.
I think it was more of a kind of cavalier behavior, and it just got overhand, so to speak. But I think he was smart enough to went out there and apologize and put it and put his foot in the right place and start going forward. So you do think he has a chance?
Oh, absolutely. I do think he has a chance. Yeah. With the way the structures are set up, yeah, I do think that he has a chance.
As we continue talking about the election, what, in your estimation, has the Republican Party done in the last 2 or 3 years for the minorities in terms of the Latinos and the Black community, especially Black people? What have they done?
I hate to be so frank, but I can't see that they have done anything to serve in the interests of Black communities and Latino communities. When we look at, in particular, what Trump has done, he's tried to really pull away and take away everything that Obama really put into effect. And so, in my estimation, I can't say that they have done much in service to Black and Latino communities.
Well, one of the things that I notice about him, and it's kind of scary, everything that is wrong, he blames Obama. He's the type of guy that doesn't take absolutely any responsibility for everything. It was never his fault. It's always someone else. He's perfect to a T. I'm amazed. I think he's an intelligent guy, but I don't understand that type of behavior. It's very unprofessional. Everything is Obama's fault. He's been in office for 3 years. He's got to turn the clock and the speedometer and do what he has to do. Are there any major minorities in the White House that he has chosen as leaders?
Well, I don't see him as leaders. I mean, this is really the issue. I don't see him as leaders. I don't see him as, really trying to advocate for and look out. And we're talking about humanity, right? Everything is about whiteness. Everything is about maintaining white supremacy. And so, that's kind of where I'm coming from. I see him, Trump in particular, as exhibiting poor leadership. I see those who are in the White House with him as doing the same thing, reaffirming, right, this kind of poor leadership.
Well, in defense to him, we must remember that he's a businessman, not a politician. So he comes in with that type of nix attitude. You do what I say and what I do. I would like to think that his intentions are good, but has not showed up in terms of the Latinos who complain about how many people he deports, the minorities in terms of job situation and what have you. So in other words, your expectation is that the Republican Party will not have the vote of the minorities going in this year? No,
I don't foresee that, especially when you look at the way things are going. If you look at the history, like I said, if we just look at the last election, it wasn't Black and brown people who voted for Trump en masse. That wasn't us.
Well, one of the things that I want to be careful about, and I want to be brutally honest, I don't want the Democrat Party to take the Black vote thinking that they have it. I think the Democrat Party or whoever, be it Biden or whoever he chooses as a vice president, should come out and talk about their plans, their structures, what are going to do for the nation. This is not a nation that is only white or it's only black.
Mhm.
We must unite and bind the country back. We have to heal the situation to avoid the problems that we have seen down the road. So it goes without saying, the expectation from little me is that the Democrat Party should not take us for granted. Are there in any way that the Democrat Party is taking the black vote for granted?
I don't see that at all. Even if we look at Biden, I think Biden is being very calculated and very strategic, right? As we saw just in using the radio interview from the Breakfast Club that we saw, right? I don't think they're taking the black vote for granted. I think they understand the power of the black vote. I think they're trying to appeal to black and Latino voters. Absolutely. I think what you talked about in us all coming together and not being divisive, right? I don't see, well, it's not just that I don't see, I know Trump is not invested in that, ideal that you just, mentioned. Not at all. He's invested in quite the opposite, in being divisive.
Well, when we talk about, let me mention to you a couple of concerns that I know the black women have in leadership. And if you can, time allowed it, see if you can address them. I think the black women are concerned about climate change, healthcare, income equality, of course. And I know they're also concerned about housing and education. Can you talk a little bit about healthcare, if it's possible?
Yes. So, I see, there are, when we talk about these black women politicians, right, I can think of they're dubbed the squad. You got Ayanna Pressley, you got Rashida Tlaib, you got Alexandria Cortez, right? All of, in particular, I'm just mentioning this.
Sure, right.
And some of their platforms address healthcare, right? You have the Black women of the Congressional Black Caucus. See that there are, health disparities, right? And are trying to put forth measures to correct these health care disparities, right? What I'm thinking of immediately is in the context of COVID. There's a lot of conversation with the protesters out there, and they're talking about, the disparities in Black and brown communities. And like I said, a lot of that is tied to structural racism as well, right? I think having testing sites out there for protesters would be key. But I know for a fact that Black women, just was stated earlier, are the visionaries and are putting forth bills and reforms to address healthcare, right? To, when we talk about, putting more resources and access and fighting, insurance, particularly because, a lot of Black and brown communities, we don't have access to insurance. So yes, there are measures on the ground. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, we don't have enough time, but we'll throw a last question at you. Are there any ideas or thought process of you or anyone who you think Biden might choose as a possible vice president? I know there's a lot of options. There's Warren, there's Ms. Harris, and so on. Is there any idea in your mind, or because you're so close to the community, what thought process he, as he mentioned, who might be a possible vice president?
Well, in my mind, because she was running for president, I wonder if he will select Elizabeth Warren. She is a visionary. When you talk about education, she was forthright.
Very strong woman.
Yes. And she was very forthright in really trying to address the problem we have in our country with student loans. I mean, student loans impact many of us. And so she was saying, hey, we need to address this issue. We need to figure out a way, right, to take this burden off, because really education
is a burden.
Right. And so, I think Elizabeth Warren might be, someone he chooses. She is my pick, as far as, a viable candidate and someone who was running.
What about Kamala Harris?
You know, I like Kamala Harris. I think she's a forward thinker. I think she has evolved, right? I mean, when we think about her history with the criminal justice system, I think it wasn't in service of Black and Brown communities. But I see growth, and I see her, like I mentioned, evolving, and so she could be a pick as well. But I don't know. We'll see.
Well, I'm quite sure he has quite a few options, and he has to sit back and think about it. I think age plays a big pitch in things. I think he's been around for a very long time. He was a vice president for Obama, and he did a very, very good job. I seem to think that the Black community has some confidence in him, but I think in order to be a very good president, to avoid the poor leadership that we go through sometime, he needs to surround himself with powerful, knowledgeable people, people that can do the job. It's essential when you're in the number one office of the world to have good people to advise you, to guide you, and sometimes to say, no, Mr. President, you're wrong. You should go in a different direction. I want to take this opportunity in behalf of the International Grapevine family to thank you so much for being our special guest tonight and imparting so many beautiful things of your thought process in terms of where the election is going. And I hope you're kind enough to come back with us next time on the Grapevine.
Absolutely. It is always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
You see. And again, this is Wallinford Lee saying goodnight for the Queen's Grapevine and thanking you so much for watching our program. We hope to see you next week at the same time at the same place. Good night.